Nathan, how's things?
Very well. So Division 1 is set up nicely for this final weekend. Remarkably, the only team with nothing to play for at all are Dublin, who are safe in mid-table. They won't be reaching the final for the first time since 2012, and they also won't be relegated. They are up against Cavan at Breffni Park. Cavan need to win that game to have any chance of survival. Mayo are up against Monaghan and Castlebar. It's Tyrone against Galway and Roscommon against Kerry. The finalists will be two out of Mayo, Galway and Kerry. Kerry top the group at the moment. From Mayo's point of view, they need to beat Monaghan and hope that Galway lose or draw in their match to book a place in the final. For Kerry, it's straightforward, really. Just get something from that game against Roscommon and they will be through to the final. Which game excites you most this weekend, Aaron?
I would say probably we'll see a bit more quality in the Mayo-Monaghan game. Simply, I think Tyrone have really shown their hand this past few weeks, and the style change that they have in terms of having a few more men in advanced positions, but particularly the quality and the amount of times that they're willing to use the foot pass now has been really impressive. I think that really they're going to have to revert to type probably this weekend, just given how Galway set up, and Galway have now been forewarned, and I don't think they'll allow that to happen. So that might be a really cagey affair. The other game, Mayo have been hot and cold, had a good performance away in very poor conditions last week. But the one thing that we know about this Monaghan team is, well, to be sure, they need to get a result to try and make sure that they don't get relegated. But they just don't do challenge games. They don't do dead rubbers. So they will be going and giving everything they have. Started the league really well. Brilliant win against Dublin. And I think just the one thing that we have seen with this Monaghan team is they're not the greatest of favourites. They tend to be sort of more comfortable in the underdog's role.
Do you think it's as simple as that it's more a mental thing than a tactical thing for Monaghan?
Okay, it is really, because they don't alter their game a huge amount. They are very solid in defence, and they don't play with their orthodox six forwards up. Conor McManus really is the marquee man for them, and I know they did sort of drip feed him in at the start. He didn't play only the last 20 minutes against Dublin, but I sort of felt that there might have just been a bit of complacency heading into the Roscommon game. It's a game that I think everyone in the country would have expected them to win, and it was a bad result for them, and then it just had a bit of a knock-on effect. I was working at the Tyrone game, and I have to say the first half hour of it was super football. Both teams playing a nice, exciting brand, really entertaining, and I don't want to put it down to it, but it really seemed like the 5 minutes before halftime, whenever they got the black card, Desi Ward got a black card, they took all their players inside the Tyrone 45, and literally it just become farcical for 5 minutes, where Tyrone didn't try to attack and Monaghan didn't try to come out.
Right.
Couple that with then the start of the second half, they had they went down with a couple of dubious enough looking head injuries to slow it down. Obviously, to me, it looked like to make sure that they wasted the 10 minutes of the black card. Yeah. But I actually felt it had a hugely negative effect on them. They never got going after it at all. They just lost all rhythm, all momentum, and Tyrone pulled away and won very comfortably in the end. And it didn't look like it, they say, because after half an hour it was anybody's game, and it had been really entertaining and stuff. So I think that was a bit of where they were maybe just trying to be a wee bit too cute, and it cost them. That
does sound as though it's almost a psychological thing, as you say, being underdogs, that actually, rather than being confident in their own abilities and having beaten Dublin in the first round, you would imagine confidence should have been sky high heading into the next few weeks of acting like a big team, that when you get an opportunity that you can back yourselves, whether you're down to 14 men or whether the opposition are down to 14 men, that you stick to your game plan, that if the game plan is good enough in the first minute against 15, it should be good enough against 14, or even if you have 14.
We just go back 12 months ago, and Monaghan went into Healy Park in Omagh to play against Tyrone. Like, we talk about Tyrone now, but their style of play last year obviously was defensive and counter-attacking football. But Monaghan went in, and it was a super game of football, but they went into Healy Park and they beat them. They went in and backed themselves. They're confident against Tyrone. they played Fermanagh the next day out again in Healy Park, and yes, Fermanagh are ultra defensive, but I just felt that Monaghan that day tried to be too cute. They tried not to expose themselves, and I think they just left Fermanagh in the game long enough that they actually got caught. I know Fermanagh was going to be defensive, but if you look at the quality of player that Monaghan had and how good they were the first day out against Tyrone, I really felt they should have just went in and said, right, we're the bosses here. We're one of the favourites for Ulster. We're going to go in and we're going to play our style of football. Yes, you need to be sort of sensible in how you play against a team with a lot of men back, but I just felt they tried to be sort of too smart and too cagey, and ultimately, like I said, that one down the goal at the end cost them.
So the way they've been playing during the league then, and we often talk about teams, whether they're setting up ultimately for playing Dublin later in the Championship, are they very much with Ulster Championship in mind, do you think? Are they trying to peak later in the summer? Is that what's going on here?
I think that is something that they brought in a few years ago, but to be fair, they finished the league well last year, and we thought they brought it in well into the Championship against Tyrone. I suppose aside from the Monaghan game, they had a really good year last year. They were kicking the ball away from getting to an All-Ireland final. They didn't have a huge amount of training done in advance of that Dublin game. I know that from personally speaking to some of them. They were later coming back, which would lead you to think that it is more with Championship in mind and making sure that, to be fair, I think this team did like to get a bit of silverware again. They would definitely see themselves being up there with Donegal and Tyrone as favourites for Ulster. But again, without doubt, they'll want to make sure they're in the Super 8, and whatever way the draw goes, an All-Ireland final would be a possibility for them. But they definitely don't want to get relegated. This Monaghan group have tried so hard and given everything that they have, with the well-documented limited resources in terms of playing pool. It is massive to be in Division 1, and while they mightn't be taking it nearly as serious as Championship, they're a very proud bunch of boys, and they'll not want to be the group that ends up going back down to Division 2, because we've seen how hard it is to get back out of it again.
Well, if Monaghan can win in Castlebar, it could do Tyrone a big favour as well, because for Tyrone to reach the final, they need Mayo and Galway to lose if Tyrone can beat Galway in Omagh. Let's talk about Tyrone then, because what a win it was last week against Dublin. Shane Stapleton was talking about this on the Gaelic Football Show yesterday. Matty Ford was his guest, and they talked about a change in tactics from Tyrone and the changing role of the sweeper.
Well, it's a lot of teams, I think, kind of end up with often a defender playing as a sweeper, which is kind of common sense. But in essence, this sweeper is going to be a guy that's free. He's going to be a guy that's on a huge amount of ball. You want a really good footballer on the ball the whole time. We're making analogies now to calling them quarterbacks, a bit like Niall Morgan did with a couple of kickouts and stuff like that, or Rory Began does, or the Corofin goalkeeper the other day. They're going to be on the ball a lot of time, with a bit of time, and you want really good quality players in that position. But the one thing for me that struck me about Tyrone the other night was playing with forwards up the field and kicking an awful lot of long ball. And people have been saying over the last couple of months that the high direct ball in causes Dublin problems. High direct ball into any full back line causes problems, because defenders don't want one-on-ones, and the Tyrone lads got a lot of them the other night. And one-on-one and the physical condition of these Tyrone lads are most of these players, and any of these players in Division 1, one-on-one is not a nice place for a defender to be.
Matty Ford there speaking on the Gaelic Football Show. You can watch that full episode, well worth a watch, up on offtheball.com. Now, Kieran McGreary was the player he was talking about there as the Tyrone sweeper last weekend, and it seems as though they got their tactics spot on and that he was able to influence the game massively, but also they were able to bypass the Dublin sweeper and the Dublin half-back line with those long balls. Such a different style and play to what we've seen from Tyrone over probably the last half a decade. Did you see this coming from Tyrone?
I did, because I seen them against Monaghan a couple of weeks ago. Did I think that it was ultimately going to come this year? Not really, because to be fair, this has been said for almost 10 years now, and Mickey Hart has been very reluctant to change. I have heard interviews of him saying this year, they felt it was important to mix your game up. You couldn't have it all running, and it can't be all direct ball. And I suppose from a neutral perspective, it's good to hear that there, because I genuinely felt that they were wasting their talents, none more so than Matty Donnelly. He spent the majority of last year being that extra man back. You're speaking about it with Kieran McGeary now. The All-Ireland final, I was sitting in it and I just couldn't believe how much he was playing behind his own midfield. He offered no attacking threat at all, no scoring threat. And to me, to be honest with you, I just think you're wasting the God-given talents that he has.
So I wonder where this change came from then over the winter. Was it Stephen O'Neill who was trying, maybe Mickey Hart was putting a little bit more trust in him and allowing him to implement a slightly different game plan?
Yeah, maybe so. And to be fair, like, what I could never understand is, this isn't the way Tyrone won the 3 All-Irelands. Like, I know if you go back to that Kerry game in 2003, yes, Pat Spillane said the puke football thing and they'd swarm defence and that there. But like, you look at the forwards that they had at that time, like, they didn't have, 14 men standing behind the ball and one man isolated up front. They were going with a full forward line of Mulligan, Stephen O'Neill, Canavan. You had Dooher, and in fairness, maybe it was Ryan Mellon as working wing half forwards. But you had, at that stage, probably the best centre half forward in the country, and Brian McGuigan as the pivot, the outlet pass all the time, got it to him in the 45, and then he was able to give a quality ball to the dangerous inside men. Now, again, that was a generational team that won 3 All-Irelands for Tyrone in a number of years, and you don't get that quality of player all the time. But I just felt they just went away far too much from what made them such a successful team and a successful county, and I'm really surprised that it actually took them so long to go back to it. But from, like I said, from a neutral perspective, I worked at the game last week, and I have to say it was unbelievably entertaining. It was real old school stuff. Both goalkeepers went long a lot of times with kickouts, which meant there was so many contested marks, and then bodies diving in for break ball, but particularly the long direct diagonal ball. It would have reminded me a wee bit of probably like the ball we would have tried to play into Ronan Clark, Stephen McDonnell back in the 2000s, where it was a diagonal ball that it just puts a defender under pressure, because particularly these Dublin players, they want to mark from in front. They want to, they back themselves to win you in a foot race, but they were in front, and then that long diagonal ball, they're just sort of caught. They don't know how close to get, and if they are too far in front, they're sort of scrambling, and just simply, like, Davy Byrne, he probably gambled. He got out in front for the ball from Maddie Donny and the Cathal McShane, but it just skipped past him, and McShane was already on the half turn, straight through one-on-one with Stephen Cluxton and finished it to the net. So I think they're definitely playing more to their strengths. They're definitely going to be harder to tie down. Maybe the only, I suppose, negative from their perspective is that the inside mark doesn't come into championship this year. But I think ultimately it definitely has a future in the game, because, as I mentioned last week, if the inside mark can encourage a Tyrone team who refuse to kick the ball to kick it, well, then it's positive for me.
Yeah, those long balls that maybe the Dublin full back line are susceptible to, and all full back lines are susceptible to, where do you want those coming in from? Is it your half forwards out around the 45? Are you looking for your half backs to make the runs up and come from even deeper?
It can't be too far, because, to be fair, the longer the ball travels, the more opportunity you give your defender inside to get his positioning right, but also the extra defender. Like, I don't call Cian O'Sullivan a sweeper, because Cian O'Sullivan just plays centre half back and doesn't follow his man up the field, and that all comes from what they learned against Donegal in 2014. But he was unable to cut this ball out because it was too good. The quality was too good, and the space was too vast for the inside defenders to even get a flick on it to break it down to him. Like, I would say maybe 2-3 balls in the whole game is all he was managed to pick up. But that is all down to the quality of the ball that was coming in from the Tyrone players. And it was always sort of around the 45 on either side, and it was a diagonal played at a good pace, at a nice height, that the forward was able to gather it on the half turn. And in that stage, like I said, you're just a defender is scrambling at all times. And
was it easy for Tyrone to build up to the opposition 45?
It wasn't, because, in fairness, like, we know Dublin, they will press and they'll press hard. But I think what we've just seen, and again, it's the past number of years with this Tyrone team, is their physicality and their conditioning is now right up there with Dublin and Mayo's and the really top teams. And I think from a Tyrone perspective, which was another positive, they didn't have the mass defence, but I have to say their work rate all across the field. And in fairness, this was Dublin and Tyrone. The work rate was unbelievable. There was nobody who was left running. Everybody was tracked from one end of the field to the other. And I think we've really only seen Mayo in this past 3 or 4 years who really went after Dublin in that manner. They haven't, unfortunately, got across the lane against them, but it was a huge part in how Tyrone managed to beat, because Dublin had a huge amount of possession. And in fairness, they did miss simple opportunities that you would tend not to see them do in the business end of the championship, but maybe you could put that down to the pressure that they were put under as well from Tyrone players.
Yeah, and you said Tyrone had played a similar style against Monaghan, so I'm sure Dublin had people at that game watching what Tyrone were going to do. And I don't want to say Dublin could be complacent, because that's not what they're about either. But at the same time, you'd wonder, have they almost been lulled into a false sense of security at times? Because so many teams just sit back with the blanket defence, and their entire game plan is built around beating a blanket defence, that when a team comes and actually tries something different, tries to play football, and has the engine like this Tyrone team clearly do, and the skill level as well, that actually they're kind of caught by surprise?
I would say that is definitely the case. Since 2014, they had to change the game, tweak it slightly, and then I think the whole build-up to the All-Ireland semi-final in 2017 was, are Dublin going to be able to cope with this counter-attacking defensive style from Tyrone? And I think everyone seen that they did. They just wiped the floor with them, and since then they've been really comfortable at any defensive setup that they're faced with. But they wouldn't have faced what they faced last week for probably a number of years at this stage. That's the style that maybe we might have seen Kerry coming at them whenever they had their great contest, particularly in the All-Ireland semi-finals. And it would be a big learning curve for Dublin, but I would think that Jim Gavin, even though he won't be happy they've lost 3 league games, I think they'll have learned. You always learn so much more about yourself in defeat than you do than processions going through leagues and really never been tested. So they'll have picked up so much in this league that definitely will stand to them come championship. And I suppose from the chasing pack, that might be the only downside to seeing a few weaknesses exposed in the league to Dublin, is that if there's one group that will adapt and will come to terms with a come championship, it would be that Dublin group.
Yeah, I guess on the flip of that, though, at least maybe teams will go into the championship thinking they have a chance, that the mentality might be actually maybe this Dublin side is beatable, and they're going on the pitch with that in their heads. Let's move on to Division 2 quickly, because I think every team in Division 2 is still involved in either a promotion or a relegation fight. The most interesting game of the weekend is probably Meath against Fermanagh. Meath on the verge of a return to Division 1, remarkably for the first time in 13 years. They're on 10 points. Fermanagh are on 8 points. But Donegal are in second place, also on 8, with a slightly better points difference, and they take on Kildare, who are on 7. So really, you'd probably imagine it's going to be 2 from those 4. I don't know how much you've seen of Meath this season. A lot of the lower divisions, you're sort of relying on those sort of 10-15 minute highlights, but it does seem as though that Andy McEntee is creating something here in Meath. And getting back to Division 1, like you talk about Monaghan, how important it is to stay there. For Meath to build over the next 4 or 5 years, they need to be getting tested regularly at the highest level.
They do, particularly for the belief for the younger players coming through in Meath. They've seen nothing this past decade but processions for Dublin, and I think that's the one thing that traditionally we've always seen is Meath players and Meath teams do not fear Dublin. They relish going into Croke Park, but unfortunately for them, they have faded badly, and they haven't been in a position since 2010 to win Leinster, and haven't been in a position since then really to ultimately compete with them. But I have to say, even from the defeat that they had against Donegal earlier in the year, it was probably horrendous enough. Basic mistake to give away a goal at the end, which ultimately cost them. But I have to say, I thought the style of football that they played that night, the quality of ball that they were getting into their inside lane, I thought they were full value for the win that night. They got caught cold towards the end, but in fairness, they didn't let that rock them. They've built on that there, and they've won anyway. They've won in a bit of style at times, and then I know particularly in the Armagh game, they were well ahead at half time playing with a strong breeze. Armagh come with everything at them, got back to within 1 point, and everyone on the ground just said there's only one winner here, it's going to be Armagh. maybe to a degree Armagh didn't push on, didn't make the most of some of their opportunities, but in fairness to Meath, they were composed and they went up the field, got a goal and a couple of points, and seen the game out. And I would say that there would have been a huge confidence boost to them, because it looked like a game that was going to run away from them, and a game that, in fairness, this past few years they generally would have lost. But they managed to hold their composure and eke out a win, and it was definitely a huge result for them. And I think, in fairness, we're talking about the All-Ireland Championship being born, Leinster has been fairly born for far too long at this stage, and I think we all need to see the likes of Meath and Kildare starting to put a bit of pressure on and making things a bit more entertaining.
Yeah, Donegal and Fermanagh are level on 8 points, and they'll meet in the Ulster quarter-final come the summer. Fermanagh's season so far, they've won 3, drawn 2 and only lost 1 of their 6 games, and nearly all their matches have been remarkably low scoring. They have a tight defence, but they score very little. They do it by the minimum, as they did last year in the Championship against Monaghan. I made the mistake a few weeks ago saying that I felt a bit sorry for Rory Gallagher, because when they go live on television against Donegal and people see the style of play, they're going to get absolutely slated. But I was quickly put in my box by, well, this is a terrible style of football, and any criticism that comes their way is well deserved. Where do you stand on this? Is like Fermanagh could well end up this week getting promoted to Division 1. For a county of their size, from where they've come from, to get to that level will be a heck of an achievement. But is it worth it with that style of football?
They'll probably say it is. I don't go along with that, because it's just not a style that I don't like, and I've never played, and I don't know how much enjoyment I would get out of it. I have to say, like, last week was disappointment. I was at the game in Crossmaglen where they were playing Armagh. Armagh were playing with the win the first half, and there was a point in it. It could have gone either way, but Fermanagh, and I have to say now, this was a strong breeze blowing right into the town goals in Crossmaglen. Fermanagh had the win in the second half, and they scored a point. And like, what I couldn't understand was, I seen them warming up, and I seen Sean Quigley shooting into the opposite goals and kicking points from 35 metres out in the warm up into a strong breeze.
Yeah. And so what, could they just not get him onto the ball, or like how with a wind at your back do you only end up scoring 1 point? Were they missing a lot of chances?
They just basically were doing the same thing again. They were getting a lot of men behind the ball. Like, they're really well set up, and their communication's very good. There's a lot of communication coming from the sideline in terms of where everyone needs to be and at what stage they need to press out. But ultimately, they just were not committing enough people to attack. Everybody was coming back to the middle of the field. Sean Quigley was coming back, even in the first half. And to be fair, I think, it's not that you're shirking the workload for your marquee forwards, but they need to be fresh as well. Like, they're the boys who are supposed to put the ball over the bar. They're the boys who are supposed to win the games for you.
Yeah.
And to have them wasting so much energy running back, where they won't do a huge amount of actual tackling. They'll block up space. They'll make it awkward. Teams will have to start playing around them to get to the outside.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what you're doing is you're wasting the energy of a man who you need to still get back up the field and score points for you.
And what was the body language of the players? Because obviously they end up losing that game against Armagh by 6 points, and if they only kick 1 point in the second half with the wind at their back, do you sense the players are fully bought into this system? I guess results would suggest they are. Or when things are going wrong on a day like that, are they getting at each other, or their looks to the sideline of what are we doing here?
No, they're not at all. They are fully 100% buying into it. Their communication, the noise from them, they were so well organised all over the place. And like I say, from the sideline, like Ronan Gallagher, Rory's brothers, was on one sideline. You had Rory and McManaman on the other sideline. They were the most vocal people in the whole ground. Everybody knew where they were supposed to be, what their job was. And I suppose there's organisation in that there, but it has to work both ways. I get the Fermanagh don't have the biggest playing pool, biggest playing population, but Rory played a similar style with Donegal, and he had Patrick McBrady, Michael Murphy, Ryan McHugh, some of the best footballers in the country. So this is just the style that he likes to play, he likes to coach. I personally would have felt, I know it's different this year where you don't have Tomas Corrigan, you don't have Seamus Quigley here or there, and they had them last year. I would have thought you would have looked at the quality of players that you had, the style of player you had, and you built your team around them. that style of football didn't suit Seamus, Sean Quigley, Tomás Corrigan, because they're finishers, they're scorers, they're inside men, and really there was generally only maybe one of them playing in all of their big games last year, and I thought they could have maximised the talents that they had, and maybe that is the reason why those boys are around. I'm not sure. I know Tomás Corrigan's travelling.
Yeah.
Seamus Quigley, he's always been in and out.
Well, it can't be enjoyable if you have any sort of a creative streak in you at all. Like, this doesn't sound like it's the environment for you. Aaron has been rendered speechless by such a comment. We were pretty much done anyways. Aaron Kernan there, we're chatting about Fermanagh, who, for all the criticism and all the stick they're getting, could well end up being promoted from Division 2 this weekend. They take on Meath in Navan. As I say, Donegal Kildare is the other big match at the top. Of course, at the bottom, Cork could well end up being relegated. They go to Armagh, who still have an outside chance of promotion, and also Tipperary up against Clare. One of those teams will go down, one of them will survive. So that is your Allianz League preview from Division 1 and Division 2 for the weekend. Offtheball.com if you want to listen back to any of that. We'll take a quick break. Before 9 o'clock, we're going to hear from Jason Quigley.
Off the Ball on Newstalk. Moncrief.
Stephen McKeers is a retired electrician in Gloucestershire who has suddenly discovered that every night a mouse was tidying up in his garden shed. The objects that were put back in the tub, how big were they?
Some of them are quite big. There's some like